So young Kim stepped off the transport shuttle and into the massive docking bay of Research Station Nexus. Her small bag hung from her shoulder as she looked up at the enormous ceiling that stretched high above her head. The station was bigger than anything she had ever seen before. Metal walls curved in smooth lines while bright lights made everything shine like silver. The air smelled different here. It carried strange scents from dozens of alien worlds mixed together. So Young took a deep breath and smiled. This was her dream come true. After years of studying alien life forms on Earth, she was finally going to work alongside real aliens from across the galaxy. A loud voice echoed through the bay. New arrivals report to Station Command immediately. So Young walked toward the main corridor where other beings moved in different directions. She had studied pictures of alien species in school, but seeing them in person was completely different. A tall creature with gray skin and 4 arms walked past her. Its head turned to look at her with large purple eyes before it continued walking. Near the information desk, a being made of what looked like living crystal was talking to a smaller creature with green fur. The crystal being's voice sounded like wind chimes when it spoke. So Young wanted to stop and listen, but she knew she had to report to the station commander first. The corridor stretched for what felt like miles. So Young's feet began to hurt in her simple black shoes, but she kept walking. Other beings passed her easily with their longer legs or floating abilities. A few glanced down at her and she could see curiosity in their strange eyes. She was probably the first human many of them had ever seen. Station Command was a large room filled with screens and control panels. Behind the main desk sat the biggest creature So Young had ever seen. It looked like a giant lizard that could walk on 2 legs. Its skin was dark green with small ridges running along its neck and arms. When it looked at her, its yellow eyes seemed to study everything about her at once. "You must be the human," the creature said in a deep voice that rumbled like thunder. "I am Commander Kelleth. Welcome to Research Station Nexus." So Young bowed politely. "Thank you, Commander. I am Dr. So Young Kim. I am very happy to be here." Kelleth looked at a data pad in his large hands. His claws made small clicking sounds on the surface. "Dr. Kim, you will be working in Research Wing 7. It is our biological studies section. Your supervisor is Dr. Nylox, a Zephyrian scientist. What kind of research will I be doing?" So Young asked. The commander's expression changed slightly. So Young was not sure, but it looked like he was trying not to smile. "You will be studying space fungi and other simple life forms. Nothing too complicated for someone of your species." So Young felt a small sting at his words, but she kept smiling. "I understand, Commander. I will do my best work." "I am sure you will," Kelleth said. "A guard will show you to your quarters and then to your work area." A smaller reptilian being appeared beside her. This one was only slightly taller than So Young and had lighter green skin. "Follow me, human," it said without much interest. Her quarters were small but clean. The bed was too big for her, and the desk was too high, but she was grateful to have her own space. The guard left her alone to unpack her things. So Young had not brought much with her. A few changes of clothes, some personal items from Earth, and a small container of her grandmother's homemade cookies. She had hoped to share them with her new colleagues as a friendly gesture. After unpacking, she made her way to Research Wing 7. The corridors in this part of the station were quieter and dimmer than the main areas. She passed several laboratories where she could see different aliens working with strange equipment. Dr. Nylox was easy to find. The Zephyrian looked exactly like the pictures in her textbooks, but much more beautiful in person. Its body was made of clear crystal that seemed to glow with its own light. Inside the crystal, small points of colored light moved like tiny stars. "So you are the human," Dr. Nylox said when So Young entered the lab. Its voice was musical, like someone singing in a language she could not understand. "I have heard about your species. You are known for being very basic creatures. I hope I can learn from you and contribute to the research," So Young replied politely. Dr. Nylox's inner lights flickered in what might have been amusement. "Yes, well, we shall see. Your workstation is over there in the corner. You will be cataloging samples of space fungi that we collect from nearby asteroids. Very simple work that should not overwhelm your limited capabilities." So Young walked to the small workstation that had been prepared for her. It was in the darkest corner of the lab, far from the main research areas. The equipment was older than what the other scientists used, but it would work fine for her needs. As she began setting up her workspace, other alien scientists came to look at her. They did not try to hide their curiosity or their lack of respect, A creature that looked like a giant insect with 4 arms and multiple eyes examined her like she was one of the specimens they studied. "This is the human?" the insect being asked Dr. Nylox. "It is even smaller than I expected." "Yes, Dr. Buzik," Nylox replied. "Humans are known to be one of the weaker species in the galaxy. But the Galactic Science Council requires diversity in research teams now, so we must make accommodations." Dr. Buzik's mandibles clicked together in what was probably laughter. What useful work could such a creature possibly do? "It looks like it might break if we touch it too hard." So Young pretended to focus on organizing her equipment while they talked about her. She had expected this kind of treatment, but it still hurt to hear. On Earth, she was considered one of the brightest researchers in her field. Here, she was just a curiosity that the other scientists had to tolerate. The first few days passed slowly. So Young spent her time examining samples of fungi and writing detailed reports about their structures and behaviors. The work was interesting to her, but she could tell that no one else cared about what she was discovering. During mealtimes in the station cafeteria, she sat alone at a small table while the other scientists gathered in groups according to their species. Sometimes she tried to join conversations, but the others would speak in languages she did not understand, or discuss concepts that were far above her assigned research level. One evening, she decided to try a different approach. She brought some of her grandmother's cookies to the lab and offered them to her colleagues. "These are traditional Earth foods," she explained to Dr. Nylox and Dr. Buzik. "My grandmother made them using a recipe that has been in our family for many generations." Dr. Nylox examined one of the small brown cookies with obvious suspicion. "What are the ingredients? Are they safe for non-human consumption?" "They are made from grain flour, sweetening compounds, and flavoring agents," So Young explained. "Nothing harmful to most species." Dr. Buzik took a small bite and immediately made a face of disgust. "This food is terrible. How can your species eat such things?" So Young felt her cheeks turn red with embarrassment. "I am sorry they are not to your taste. I thought you might enjoy trying something from Earth." "Next time, do not bring your primitive foods to the workplace," Dr. Nylox said dismissively. "We have standards to maintain here." So Young quietly put the cookies away and returned to her workstation. She spent the rest of the evening in silence, focusing on her fungi samples and trying not to think about the laughter she heard coming from the other scientists. That night in her quarters, she video called her family on Earth. Her mother asked how she was settling in with her new colleagues. "Everyone here is very intelligent," So Young said carefully. "I am learning a lot from them." She did not mention how they treated her or how they saw her as nothing more than a harmless pet that had somehow found its way onto their important research station. She would prove herself through her work, she decided. Eventually, they would see that humans had something valuable to contribute to galactic science. But as she lay in her too-large bed that night, So Young had no idea that very soon, circumstances would force her to show her colleagues a very different side of human nature. A side that would change everything they thought they knew about her supposedly harmless species. 3 weeks had passed since So Young arrived at Research Station Nexus. She had settled into a routine of quiet work in her corner of the laboratory. Every morning she examined new fungus samples, recorded their properties, and wrote detailed reports that no one seemed to read. The other scientists had stopped paying attention to her completely. To them, she was just part of the background now, like the humming of the air recycling systems or the soft glow of the emergency lights. This suited So Young fine. It gave her time to observe and learn about her colleagues without being noticed. That morning started like any other. So Young was looking at a particularly interesting sample of blue fungus when the station's alarm system made a soft chiming sound. The sound was not urgent, just a notification that something required attention. Commander Kelleth's voice came through the communication system. "All department heads report to the bridge immediately. We have detected an unidentified vessel approaching our position." Dr. Nylox's crystal body flickered with brighter lights as the announcement echoed through the lab. "Probably just another supply ship that forgot to send proper identification codes," the Zephyrian said to Dr. Buzik. But So Young noticed something in Dr. Nylox's voice. A small change in tone that suggested the crystal being was not as calm as it wanted to appear. She had learned to listen carefully to how people spoke, not just what they said. It was a skill her grandmother had taught her when she was young. Dr. Buzik's mandibles clicked together nervously. Supply ships do not usually approach from that vector. The shipping lanes are in a different direction. You worry too much, Dr. Nylox replied, but its inner lights continued to flicker faster than normal. So-young pretended to focus on her work while listening to their conversation. She had noticed that when Dr. Nylox was calm, its lights moved in slow, steady patterns. When something bothered the Zephyrian, the lights moved quickly and changed colors more often. Right now they were moving very quickly indeed. An hour later, Commander Kelleth made another announcement. All personnel are advised that we have an unidentified ship requesting permission to dock with our station. They claim to be merchants in need of emergency repairs. We are following standard protocols for unexpected visitors, So-young looked up from her microscope and watched her colleagues' reactions. Dr. Buzzik had stopped working entirely and was cleaning its equipment over and over again. She had observed that the insect-like being did this when it was nervous. Dr. Nylox was reorganizing data files that were already perfectly organized. Across the lab, a large gray being called Throck was working at a chemical analysis station. Throck belonged to a species called Gorellians, and he usually sang while he worked. His people were known for their cheerful nature and love of music. But today, Throck was completely silent. His forearms moved mechanically through his tasks without any of his usual energy. These small changes in behavior might have seemed normal to most observers. But So-young had spent years studying animal behavior before she started working with aliens. She knew that when multiple individuals in a group suddenly changed their normal patterns, it usually meant they sensed some kind of danger. During lunch break, she decided to visit the station's library. The computer system there had access to databases from across the galaxy. She told herself she was just curious about the approaching ship, but something deeper was driving her to investigate. The library was nearly empty. Most of the station's crew were either working or trying to get more information about their unexpected visitors. So-young sat at a terminal in the back corner and began searching for information about ships that had requested emergency assistance in this region of space. What she found made her stomach feel cold. Over the past 6 months, there had been 17 reports of ships requesting emergency docking privileges at research stations, mining facilities, and trading posts. In 12 of those cases, the facilities had gone completely silent within days of allowing the ships to dock. No distress signals, no final communications, nothing. The other 5 facilities had been found weeks later by patrol ships. They were empty. All equipment and valuable materials were gone. The people who had worked there were never found. So-young read through each report carefully. The ships that had approached these facilities all had different identification codes and claimed to be from different companies. But they shared certain characteristics. They all approached from unusual angles that avoided main shipping routes. They all claimed to need emergency repairs, and they all carried crews that kept to themselves and avoided interaction with station personnel. She pulled up the current sensor readings of their approaching visitor. The ship matched the same profile perfectly. So-young printed out her research and hurried to find Commander Kelleth. She found him in his office reviewing security protocols with his senior staff. "Commander," she said politely, waiting to be acknowledged. Kelleth looked up with obvious annoyance. "Dr. Kim, I'm quite busy at the moment." "What do you need?" "I have been researching similar incidents involving ships requesting emergency assistance," she began, holding out her printed reports. "I believe there may be cause for concern about our current visitors." The commander glanced at the papers for perhaps 3 seconds before setting them aside. "Dr. Kim, I appreciate your interest in station security, but these matters are far beyond your area of expertise. We have trained professionals handling the situation. But sir, if you would just look at the pattern of incidents—" "Dr. Kim," Kelleth interrupted, his voice carrying a note of finality, "please return to your research duties and let us handle operational matters. Your concerns are noted, but not necessary." So-young felt her face grow warm with frustration, but she bowed politely and left the office. She had expected this reaction, but it still disappointed her. Her next stop was Dr. Vex 7, the station's psychologist. The Andromedan was known for being more approachable than most of the senior staff. Its office was filled with strange plants from various worlds, and the air smelled like flowers from a dozen different planets. "Dr. Kim," Vex 7 said as she entered. The Andromedan looked like a tall, thin human with pale blue skin and large black eyes. "What brings you to see me today?" So-young explained her concerns about the approaching ship and showed Vex 7 her research. The psychologist listened patiently and examined the data she had collected. "I can see that you have put considerable effort into this investigation," Vex 7 said when she finished. "However, I think what you are experiencing might be related to stress from adapting to life on the station." "I do not understand," So Young replied. "Humans are known to have very strong social bonding instincts," Vex 7 explained in a gentle voice. "When you are separated from your family and friends, your mind sometimes creates threats that are not really there. This helps explain why you are seeing patterns in these incidents that our trained security personnel have not identified. But the data clearly shows." "The data shows coincidences," Vex 7 interrupted kindly. "Space is a dangerous place. Ships break down, communications fail, accidents happen. Your human brain is trying to connect these random events into a story that makes sense to you." So Young felt a familiar frustration rising in her chest. "So you think I am imagining these patterns because I am lonely?" "Not imagining," Vex 7 corrected, "but perhaps seeing connections that are not actually there. This is very common among your species. Humans evolved to see faces in clouds and hear voices in wind. It helped your ancestors survive on Earth, but it can cause problems in more complex environments like space stations." So Young thanked Dr. Vex 7 for the time and left the office. She walked slowly back to her laboratory, thinking about what the psychologist had said. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe her human brain was playing tricks on her. But as she passed through the main corridor, she saw the approaching ship through one of the large windows. It was sleek and dark, with unusual markings along its hull. And as she watched, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The ship was not heading directly for the station's main docking bay, as most emergency vessels would. Instead, it was approaching at an angle that would give its crew a clear view of all the station's defensive positions and escape routes. So Young stood at the window for a long time, watching the ship grow larger as it approached. Her colleagues might think she was just a paranoid human seeing threats where none existed, but every instinct she possessed was screaming that something was very wrong. She returned to her laboratory and sat down at her workstation. But instead of examining fungus samples, she began making a list of everything she had observed about the station's layout, security procedures, and daily routines. If she was right about the approaching ship, she wanted to be prepared. And if she was wrong, well, at least she would have learned more about her new home. Either way, So Young had the feeling that life on Research Station Nexus was about to become much more interesting. The mysterious ship docked with Research Station Nexus early the next morning. So Young watched from her laboratory window as the sleek black vessel connected to Docking Bay 3. The ship was smaller than most cargo vessels, but larger than a typical transport. Its surface was covered with strange markings that looked like scratches or scars. Commander Kelleth's voice echoed through the station's communication system. "All personnel, we are hosting emergency visitors while their ship undergoes repairs. Please extend them our usual courtesy and cooperation." An hour later, So Young saw the visitors for the first time as they walked through the main corridor past her laboratory. There were 6 of them, and they looked similar to reptiles but walked upright like humans. Their skin was dark red with black spots, and they wore matching gray uniforms. The leader was taller than the others and had more elaborate markings on his uniform. Dr. Nylock seemed excited to meet the new arrivals. "Corvethi merchants," the Zephyrian explained to anyone who would listen. "They are known throughout the galaxy for their trading skills and knowledge of rare materials." But So Young noticed things about the visitors that her colleagues missed completely. When the Corvethi walked through the corridors, they did not look around with the casual curiosity of normal travelers. Instead, their eyes moved in systematic patterns, taking note of every door, every camera, every security checkpoint. She watched them during the welcome dinner that evening. The station's senior staff had organized a meal in the main cafeteria to honor their guests. The Corvethi captain, who introduced himself as Zex-9, told stories about trading adventures in distant star systems. Everyone seemed charmed by his tales. So Young sat at a table in the back corner, picking at her food and observing. Captain Zex-9 was an excellent storyteller, but she noticed that his stories contained very specific details about space station layouts, security procedures, and the locations of valuable equipment. He was gathering intelligence while pretending to entertain his hosts. The other Corvethi crew members had spread themselves around the cafeteria, each sitting with different groups of station personnel. They asked friendly questions about everyone's work, how long they had been on the station, and what their daily routines were like. To most listeners, these seemed like normal social conversations, but So-Young recognized them as interrogations disguised as small talk. She also noticed how the Corvethi moved. When they walked, they unconsciously positioned themselves near exits and kept their backs to walls. Their hands stayed close to their belts where weapons might be hidden. These were not the movements of peaceful merchants. These were the movements of predators sizing up their prey. After dinner, So-Young decided to follow one of the Corvethi crew members. She kept her distance as the alien walked through the station's corridors, supposedly exploring while waiting for ship repairs to be completed. But instead of looking at the interesting features that most visitors would notice, the Corvethi was mapping the station's security systems. She watched as he stopped at each checkpoint and examined the scanners and cameras. He counted the number of guards and timed their patrol routes. When he thought no one was looking, he used a small device to scan the electronic locks on important doors. So-Young followed him for almost an hour, staying hidden behind corners and in doorways. The Corvethi was so focused on his reconnaissance that he never noticed her presence. Finally, he returned to the guest quarters where his crew was staying. Early the next morning, So-Young went to find Security Chief Throck. The big Gorelian was in the security office, reviewing routine reports and enjoying his breakfast. When she knocked on his door, he looked up with a friendly smile. "Little So-Young," he rumbled in his deep voice. "What brings you to see old Throck so early in the morning?" "I am concerned about our visitors," she said, sitting down across from his desk. "I think they may not be what they claim to be." Throck's expression grew amused. "Oh, and what makes you think that?" So-Young explained what she had observed during the dinner and while following the Corvethi crew member. She described their behavior patterns and how they were systematically gathering information about the station. Throck listened politely, but she could see that he was not taking her seriously. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and patted her head gently. "So-Young, you worry too much," he said with paternal kindness. "These Corvethi are well-known traders. They are naturally curious about new places. It is how they learn about potential business opportunities. But the way they were examining our security systems, they want to make sure their own ship is safe while it is docked here," Throck interrupted. "Any smart merchant would do the same thing. You are seeing danger where there is only normal caution." So-Young felt frustration building in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "What if I am right? What if they are planning something harmful?" Throck's expression grew more serious, but not in the way she had hoped. "So-Young, I know it is difficult to be the only human on this station. Sometimes when people feel alone and scared, they start to see threats everywhere. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Vex 7 about these feelings." "This is not about my feelings," So-Young protested. "This is about observable behavior patterns that suggest you need to relax and trust the people who are trained to handle security matters," Throck said firmly. "The Corvethi have proper identification. Their ship registration is valid. They have committed no crimes and broken no rules. I will not treat our guests with suspicion based on the paranoid fears of someone who has been on this station for less than a month." So-Young left Throck's office feeling defeated, but not discouraged. She had expected this reaction, but she had hoped that her evidence might change his mind. Now she realized that her colleagues' assumption about human limitations was so strong that they could not even consider the possibility that she might be right. She spent the rest of the day watching the Corvethi more carefully. During lunch, she sat where she could observe their table and noticed that they ate very little. Most of their mealtime was spent in quiet conversation using words she could not understand. But their body language suggested they were making plans. That afternoon, she saw 2 of them examining the station's power distribution center. They told the engineer on duty that they were interested in the technology for their own ship. The engineer was happy to explain how everything worked, not realizing that he was giving potential enemies a complete blueprint of the station's vital systems. By evening, So-Young had compiled a mental list of every security vulnerability the Corvethi had examined. They had mapped the guard rotations, identified the locations of all weapons storage areas, and learned the override codes for several critical systems. If they were planning an attack, they now had everything they needed. She tried one more time to warn someone in authority. Dr. Vex 7 was in the medical bay, conducting routine health checks on the station crew. "Dr. Vex 7, So-Young said when she found the Andromedan alone. "I need to speak with you about the Corvethi visitors." The psychologist looked up from his medical charts with a patient expression. So Young, we discussed this yesterday. Your concerns about these merchants are— They are not merchants, So Young interrupted. I have been watching them and they are gathering intelligence about our defenses and security procedures. Dr. Vex 7 set down his charts and gave her his full attention. So Young, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are experiencing what we call hypervigilance. It is a common stress response among humans who feel isolated or threatened. Your mind is interpreting normal behaviors as signs of danger because it is trying to protect you from perceived threats that do not actually exist. But I have specific examples. Examples that can be explained by normal curiosity and standard safety precautions, Vex 7 said gently. So Young, I am going to recommend that you undergo a psychological evaluation. This level of persistent paranoia could indicate that you are having difficulty adapting to life away from Earth. So, Young stared at the psychologist for a long moment. She realized that nothing she could say would convince him or anyone else on the station. Their assumptions about human intelligence and perception were too deeply ingrained. Thank you for your time, she said quietly, and left the medical bay. That night, So Young lay in her bed staring at the ceiling. She had done everything she could to warn her colleagues, but they refused to listen. If the Corvethi were planning what she suspected, the station and everyone on it would be in terrible danger. She made a decision that would have surprised her colleagues if they had known about it. If the authorities would not protect the station, she would have to do it herself. She began planning for a scenario that she hoped would never happen, but that every instinct told her was coming soon. The gentle human researcher was about to become something that none of her alien colleagues could imagine. So Young woke up to the sound of screaming. Emergency lights flashed red throughout her quarters as alarms blared through the communication system. She jumped out of bed and ran to her door, but it would not open. The lock had been changed to emergency mode, sealing all crew quarters automatically. Through her small window, she could see Corvethi soldiers running through the corridors with weapons in their hands. They were no longer pretending to be peaceful merchants. Their friendly masks had been thrown away, revealing the predators beneath. Commander Kelleth's voice came through the communication system, but he sounded different. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by pain and fear. All personnel, remain in your quarters. We are experiencing a security situation. Do not attempt to leave your rooms. So Young knew that Kelleth was speaking under duress. The Corvethi had taken control of the station and were using him to keep the crew calm while they completed their takeover. She pressed her face against the window and watched the corridor outside her room. 2 Corvethi guards walked past, checking door seals and making sure everyone was locked inside. Their weapons looked advanced and deadly. These were not the tools of merchants but of professional raiders. The communication system crackled again, and this time a different voice spoke. It was Captain Zex 9, but his tone was no longer friendly and charming. Attention station personnel. This facility is now under Corvethi control. You will remain in your quarters while we conduct our business. Anyone who attempts to interfere will be severely punished. So Young felt anger rising in her chest. Her colleagues had ignored her warnings and now they were all prisoners. But the anger was mixed with something else. A cold, calculating feeling that she had never experienced before. She moved away from the window and began examining her quarters more carefully. The room had been designed for comfort, not security. The walls were thin metal panels, and the ceiling was made of removable tiles that provided access to maintenance areas above. Working quietly, So Young used a metal tool from her desk to pry open one of the ceiling tiles. The space above was dark and cramped, but it connected to similar spaces throughout the station. She could use the maintenance tunnels to move around without being detected. Before climbing up, she gathered a few items that might be useful: a small flashlight, some tools from her laboratory kit, and the container of her grandmother's cookies. The cookies seemed unimportant now, but the metal container might serve other purposes. The maintenance tunnels were uncomfortable and difficult to navigate, but they allowed her to move freely through the station. She crawled carefully through the narrow spaces, following signs that showed the direction to different areas. Her first destination was the security office. She wanted to see what had happened to Throck and understand the extent of the Corvethi takeover. When she reached the security section, she peered down through a ceiling vent into the main office. What she saw made her stomach turn cold. Throck was sitting in a chair with his hands bound behind his back. Blood ran down the side of his head from a large cut, and one of his forearms hung at an unnatural angle. Captain X9 stood in front of the injured Garelian, speaking in a voice that was calm but filled with menace. "You see how easy this was, Security Chief. Your defenses were pathetic. Your people had no training for real threats. This station was like a fruit waiting to be picked." "What do you want?" Throck asked weakly. "This station houses a prototype quantum drive in Research Bay 12, X9 replied. "That device is worth more money than your entire crew will earn in their lifetimes. We also need skilled workers for mining operations in distant systems. Your people will serve both purposes." "You cannot just take people as slaves," Throck protested. "The Galactic Council will—" X9 hit him across the face with the back of his hand. "The Galactic Council will never know what happened here. Your station will simply disappear like so many others. Space is dangerous. Accidents happen." So Young listened to this conversation with growing horror and rage. The Corvethi were not just thieves. They were slavers who planned to kidnap the entire station crew and sell them to mining colonies in distant star systems. She crawled through the tunnels to Research Bay 12 to see what the raiders were doing there. Through another vent, she watched Corvethi technicians working to remove the quantum drive device. It was a large machine covered with cables and cooling systems. Several aliens in Corvethi uniforms were carefully disconnecting it while others loaded valuable equipment onto transport containers. The work was being supervised by one of the crew members she had followed the day before. He directed the operation with military precision, proving that this was a well-planned raid by experienced criminals. So Young continued moving through the tunnels, gathering information about the Corvethi positions and activities. They had stationed guards at all major intersections and were systematically looting the station's most valuable resources. But she noticed something important. They had not found the maintenance tunnel system. The raiders had studied the station's official blueprints, but the tunnels were old additions that were not included in the main documentation. This gave her a significant advantage. She made her way to the main cafeteria, where she discovered that all the station personnel had been gathered together. More than 200 beings from dozens of different species sat on the floor with their hands bound. Corvethi guards watched them with weapons ready. Dr. Nylox was there, his crystal body flickering with dim, frightened lights. Dr. Buzzik sat nearby, his mandibles clicking nervously. Dr. Vex 7 looked pale and shocked, as if he could not believe what was happening. So Young felt a mix of sympathy and frustration as she watched her colleagues. They had dismissed her warnings because they thought humans were too primitive to understand complex threats. Now they were helpless prisoners because their advanced civilizations had not prepared them for raw violence and deception. But as she watched the prisoners, So Young began to notice something interesting. The Corvethi guards were relaxed and confident. They talked casually among themselves and paid little attention to their captives. They clearly believed that the situation was completely under their control. This was their first mistake. The raiders had studied the station personnel files and knew they were dealing with scientists and researchers. They expected their prisoners to be passive and cooperative, like most educated beings from civilized worlds. They had no experience dealing with a species that had evolved from persistence hunters and apex predators. So Young crawled back through the tunnels to the laboratory section, where she had an idea. The chemical supplies in the research labs could be used to create various compounds that might be useful in her situation. Her knowledge of chemistry had been dismissed as basic by her colleagues, but it was about to become very important. Working in complete darkness to avoid detection, she began mixing chemicals in small containers. She created smoke bombs using simple reactive compounds, flash powders that would produce bright lights and loud sounds, and other devices that could serve as distractions or weapons. She also visited the station's small manufacturing bay, where research equipment was built and repaired. Using tools and materials she found there, she constructed several simple devices that would help her move through the station undetected. As she worked, So Young felt something changing inside herself. The fear and uncertainty she had felt when the attack began were being replaced by a cold, focused determination. Her mind was calculating distances, timing, and probabilities with a clarity that surprised her. She realized that her human brain was switching into a different mode of operation. For millions of years, her ancestors had survived by hunting creatures much larger and stronger than themselves. They had used intelligence, persistence, and coordinated tactics to bring down prey that could easily kill them in direct combat. The Corvethi had made the same mistake that countless species had made throughout Earth's history. They had underestimated the small, seemingly harmless creature that was now stalking them through their own territory. By the time she finished her preparations, So Young was no longer thinking like a researcher studying alien life forms. She was thinking like a predator planning the hunt of her life. The gentle human scientist was gone. In her place was something that the galaxy had not seen before. A human being operating on pure survival instinct in a life-or-death situation. The Corvethi had captured a research station full of advanced beings from sophisticated civilizations. But they had also released something into their environment that none of them were prepared to face. The hunt was about to begin. So Young began her campaign during the station's night cycle. When most of the Corvethi had settled into routine patrol patterns, she had spent hours observing their movements and identifying their weaknesses. Now it was time to act. Her first target was a lone guard stationed near the power distribution center. The Corvethi soldier was bored and careless, more interested in reading something on his personal device than watching for threats. He had no reason to expect danger from the harmless human scientists who were all safely locked away. So Young dropped silently from a ceiling vent behind the guard. Before he could react, she had wrapped her arms around his neck in a chokehold that her grandfather had taught her during childhood self-defense lessons. The guard struggled briefly, then went unconscious. So Young dragged his body into a maintenance closet and took his weapon. The weapon was heavier than she expected, but her hands adapted quickly to its shape and controls. Humans had been using tools for millions of years. Learning to operate alien technology was just another step in that long evolution. Her next target was the communication center, where 2 guards were monitoring the station's systems. So Young used one of her homemade smoke bombs to fill the room with thick, choking vapor. In the confusion, she disabled both guards and destroyed their communication equipment. The Corvethi command structure began to notice problems when the guards failed to report in during their scheduled check-ins. Captain X9 sent teams to investigate, but they found only empty corridors and unconscious soldiers. So Young moved through the maintenance tunnels like a ghost, appearing where the raiders least expected her and vanishing before they could respond. She sabotaged their equipment, disabled their weapons, and left behind small signs of her presence that made the survivors increasingly nervous. One of her most effective psychological tactics was music. She accessed the station's communication system and began playing traditional Korean songs that her grandmother had taught her. The melodies echoed through empty corridors at random times, creating an atmosphere of supernatural dread. The Corvethi had never heard human music before. To their ears, the ancient songs sounded like nothing they could understand or predict. The fact that the music came from speakers throughout the station made it seem like the walls themselves were singing. "What is that sound?" she heard one guard ask another as she watched from a ceiling vent. "I do not know," his companion replied nervously. "It started after we lost contact with the communication center team. Do you think it is some kind of defense system?" "Defense systems do not sing, you fool." But the fear in their voices told So Young that her psychological warfare was working. The confident raiders were becoming frightened soldiers who jumped at shadows and questioned every sound. As the hours passed, more Corvethi soldiers disappeared. Some were found unconscious in locked rooms. Others vanished completely, leaving only their weapons behind. The raiders began traveling in larger groups, but this made them easier to track and harder to maneuver in the station's narrow corridors. Captain X9 grew increasingly frustrated as his control over the situation slipped away. He had started the day with 16 soldiers under his command. By morning, only 8 remained conscious and able to fight. "What are we dealing with?" he demanded of his remaining crew. "The station personnel are all secured in the main bay. The human was in her quarters when we took control." "How is someone doing this?" His lieutenant, a scarred veteran of many raids, looked uncomfortable.
"Captain, I think the human may have escaped from her quarters." X9 laughed harshly.
"One small human female against my trained soldiers? Are you suggesting that a primitive creature from a backward planet has defeated half my crew?" "I am suggesting that we may have underestimated the situation," the lieutenant replied carefully. "Impossible," X9 snarled. "Humans are weak, slow, and cowardly. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no advanced technology. They are barely more dangerous than the fungus samples in the research labs. But even as he spoke these words, Zex-9 felt doubt creeping into his mind. His men were experienced raiders who had successfully attacked dozens of facilities. They did not simply disappear or fall unconscious for no reason. So Young heard this conversation from her hiding place in the ventilation system above the Corvathi command post. She smiled grimly at their confusion. They were trying to understand her actions using their own cultural framework, but humans operated according to different rules. The Corvathi were raiders and slavers, but they were not persistence hunters. Their species had evolved to be aggressive and strong, relying on direct confrontation and overwhelming force. They had no experience dealing with an opponent who used patience, stealth, and psychological warfare. That afternoon, So Young escalated her campaign. She began targeting the Corvathi who were guarding the hostages in the main cafeteria. Using flashbang devices she had created in the chemistry lab, she created diversions that allowed her to disable guards and retreat before reinforcements could arrive. The prisoners watched these attacks with growing amazement. Dr. Nylox's crystal body flickered with brighter lights as he began to understand what was happening. Dr. Buzzik's mandibles clicked with excitement rather than fear for the first time. Since the raid began, how is she doing this? Dr. Vex-7 whispered to the being sitting near him. She tried to warn us, Dr. Nylox replied quietly. We thought she was paranoid and primitive, but she saw what we missed. She understood what these raiders really were. Throck, despite his injuries, managed a weak smile. Little So Young is not so little after all. The prisoners began to realize that their assessment of human capabilities had been completely wrong. The gentle researcher who had offered them cookies and apologized for her primitive food was systematically dismantling a professional military operation using nothing but intelligence and determination. By evening, Captain Zex-9 had lost 12 of his 16 soldiers. The survivors were exhausted and terrified, jumping at every sound and seeing threats in every shadow. The confident raid had turned into a nightmare where death could come from anywhere at any time. So Young knew that the time for stealth was almost over. The remaining Corvathi would soon realize that their only option was to kill the hostages and flee the station. She needed to force a final confrontation before they reached that conclusion. She accessed the station's environmental controls and began manipulating the lighting and air circulation systems. Corridors became dark mazes where sounds echoed strangely and shadows moved in unexpected ways. The temperature dropped, making the raiders uncomfortable and on edge. Then she began her final psychological assault. Using the communication system, she spoke to the Corvathi in their own language, which she had learned from the station's database during her preparation time. You came here to hunt, her voice echoed through the corridors. But now you are the prey. This is what it feels like to be hunted by something smarter than you are. The words were delivered in perfect Corvathi, but spoken with the accent and rhythm of human speech. The effect was deeply unsettling to the alien raiders, who could not understand how a primitive human had learned their language so quickly and completely. You thought humans were weak, So Young continued, her voice seeming to come from everywhere at once. But weakness and gentleness are not the same thing. We choose to be kind when we can, but when we cannot, we become something else entirely. Captain Zex-9 realized that his raid had turned into a disaster beyond his worst fears. He was facing an enemy unlike anything he had encountered before. The small human female had transformed herself into something that defied all his understanding of combat and warfare. For the first time in his career as a raider, Zex-9 felt genuine fear. He was no longer the hunter. He had become the hunted. And somewhere in the darkness of the station, So Young was closing in for the final confrontation. The final confrontation came at dawn, station time. Captain Zex-9 had gathered his 4 remaining soldiers in the main cafeteria with the hostages. His plan was simple: use the prisoners as shields while he and his crew escaped to their ship with whatever valuable equipment they could carry. But So Young had anticipated this move. She had spent the night preparing for exactly this scenario, setting traps throughout the station and positioning herself for the decisive moment. Zex-9 stood in the center of the cafeteria, holding a weapon pointed at Dr. Nylox's crystal head. The Zephyrian's inner lights flickered with terror as the cold metal pressed against his fragile surface. "Human," Zex-9 called out, his voice echoing through the large room. "I know you can hear me. Show yourself or I will start killing your colleagues one by one." The hostages sat in tense silence, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of So-Young. They had watched her systematic destruction of the Corvethi force with growing amazement, but now they feared she might be too late to save them. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the lights in the cafeteria began to dim until only the emergency illumination remained. The room fell into an eerie twilight that cast strange shadows across the walls. "You want to see me?" So-Young's voice came from the communication speakers mounted throughout the room. She spoke in Corvethi, her pronunciation perfect and her tone calm. "Very well." She emerged from a ventilation grate in the ceiling, dropping silently to the floor behind Zex-9's position. But instead of attacking immediately, she stood still and waited for him to notice her presence. When the Corvethi captain turned around, he found himself face to face with someone he barely recognized. The gentle human researcher was gone. In her place stood a figure that radiated quiet confidence and deadly purpose. So-Young had tied her long black hair back with strips of cloth torn from her laboratory coat. Her clothes were dirty from crawling through maintenance tunnels, and her hands carried improvised weapons that looked crude but effective. But it was her eyes that made Zex-9 step backward involuntarily. They were the eyes of a predator that had just finished a successful hunt. "Release my colleagues," So-Young said quietly, still speaking in Corvethi. "Your operation has failed. Your ship's engines have been disabled. Your escape route has been blocked. Surrender now, and you will be treated according to Galactic Council protocols for captured raiders." Zex-9 tightened his grip on his weapon and pressed it harder against Dr. Nylox's head. "You are bluffing, human. You are one small female against 4 trained soldiers. Even if you have caused some trouble for my crew, you cannot defeat us in direct combat." So-Young smiled, and the expression was not gentle or friendly. It was the smile of something that had spent the night hunting in the dark and had enjoyed every moment of it. "Captain Zex-9," she said, "you have studied the wrong databases about my species. You learned that humans are physically weak compared to most galactic species. You learned that we have no natural armor or weapons. You learned that our technology is primitive by galactic standards." She took a step forward, and Zex-9 found himself backing away despite holding the hostage. "But you did not learn the most important thing about humans," So-Young continued. "We are persistence hunters. For millions of years we tracked and killed creatures much larger and stronger than ourselves. We did not do this with claws or fangs or armored skin. We did it with intelligence, patience, and the absolute refusal to give up." Another step forward. The remaining Corvethi soldiers began to look nervous as they remembered how easily their comrades had been defeated by this small human female. "You came to my home," So-Young said, her voice growing colder. "You threatened my friends. You planned to sell them as slaves to mining colonies where they would work until they died. This was your mistake, Captain. You triggered every predatory instinct that my species has developed over millions of years of evolution." Zex-9 realized that he was no longer in control of the situation. The human was not begging for mercy or trying to negotiate. She was explaining why he was already defeated. "Your ship has no power because I destroyed the connection cables while your crew was sleeping," So-Young continued. "Your weapons will not function because I introduced a corrosive agent into their power cells. Your communication equipment cannot call for help because I severed the main transmission array." The Corvethi captain's eyes widened as he understood the scope of what she had accomplished during her night of hunting. "But most importantly," So-Young said, taking another step forward, "your crew is no longer functional because I have been systematically removing them from your command structure. They are alive but unconscious, secured in various locations throughout the station where they cannot cause any more harm." She was now close enough that Zex-9 could see the determination in her dark eyes. For the first time in his career, the experienced raider felt completely outmatched by an opponent. "How?" he whispered. "Because you misunderstood what humans are," So-Young replied. "We are not weak. We are not primitive. We are the species that conquered an entire planet by being smarter, more persistent, and more adaptable than everything else that lived there. We are the species that looked at the vast emptiness of space and decided to explore it. We are the species that makes friends with aliens and shares cookies. But we are also the species that will hunt you through the darkness for as long as it takes to protect what we care about." Zex-9 looked around the cafeteria and saw that his remaining soldiers were backing away from him. They had finally realized what their captain was too proud to admit. They were not raiders anymore. They were prey that had been cornered by an apex predator. Surrender, So Young said simply. It is your only remaining option. The weapon in Zex-9's hand began to shake as the full weight of his failure settled on him. He had led his crew into a trap disguised as an easy target. The Harmless research station had turned into a hunting ground where the hunters became the hunted. Slowly, he lowered his weapon and released Dr. Nylox. The Zephyrian stumbled away from him, his crystal body flickering with relief and amazement. We surrender, Zex-9 said quietly. So Young nodded and activated her communication device. This is Dr. So Young Kim calling Galactic Security. Research Station Nexus is secure. We have captured a crew of Corvethi raiders and require immediate assistance. As the prisoners began to cheer and embrace each other, So Young walked over to check on the injured security chief Throck. The big Gorelian looked up at her with new respect and admiration. Little So Young, he said weakly. You are not little at all. She smiled and began treating his wounds with supplies from the medical kit she had prepared. I am still the same person I was yesterday, Throck, but sometimes being gentle means being gentle with your friends and dangerous to your enemies. Dr. Vex 7 approached her hesitantly. The Andromedan psychologist looked embarrassed and ashamed. Dr. Kim, I owe you an apology, we all do. We completely misunderstood your capabilities and your warnings. You understood humans based on incomplete data, So Young replied without anger. Your databases probably described us as we appear in peaceful situations, but every species has aspects that only emerge under extreme circumstances. Dr. Nylox's crystal body flickered with curious patterns. What you did tonight, this was normal human behavior? So Young considered the question carefully. It was human behavior under threat. Most humans spend their entire lives without needing to access these capabilities. We prefer to be kind, creative, and cooperative. But when our families or friends are in danger, we become something different. Captain Kelleth, who had been freed from Corvethi custody, approached with obvious respect. Dr. Kim, I am recommending you for the Galactic Council's highest civilian honor. Your actions saved not only the station but the lives of everyone aboard. So Young shook her head politely. I was just protecting my colleagues, Commander. Any human would have done the same thing in my situation. Any human? Dr. Buzik asked, his mandibles clicking with amazement. Your entire species possesses these capabilities? In potential, yes, So Young replied. Humans have been persistence hunters for millions of years. We learned to track, outsmart, and outlast creatures much larger than ourselves. We developed complex social cooperation and advanced tool use because we needed these skills to survive. When necessary, these ancient abilities can still emerge. The rescued hostages gathered around her, looking at their colleague with new eyes. The gentle researcher who had quietly cataloged fungus samples was the same person who had single-handedly defeated a crew of professional raiders. Why did you not tell us about these capabilities? Dr. Nylox asked. So Young smiled sadly. Would you have believed me? When I tried to warn you about the Corvethi threat, you dismissed my concerns as primitive paranoia. If I had told you that humans were evolved predators, you would have thought I was boasting or delusional. But now we understand, Throck said from where he sat receiving medical treatment. Your species appears harmless because you choose to be harmless. But when threats emerge, you become something entirely different. That is correct, So Young said. Humans value peace, cooperation, and kindness. But we also value survival and the protection of those we care about. These two aspects of our nature are not contradictory. They are complementary. 3 hours later, Galactic security forces arrived at the station. They found the Corvethi raiders secured and ready for transport to prison facilities. The security officers were amazed to learn that a single human researcher had been responsible for stopping the entire raid. Commander Kelleth filed a detailed report that would change how humans were viewed throughout the galaxy. The report described not only what So Young had accomplished, but how she had done it. Her tactics were studied by military academies and security agencies across known space. Within weeks of the incident, So Young received offers from dozens of organizations wanting to employ her skills. The Galactic Defense Force wanted her to train their special operations units. Private security companies offered her enormous salaries to design protection systems for high-value facilities. But So Young turned down most of these offers. She accepted a position with the Galactic Peacekeeping Academy, where she would teach threat assessment and crisis response to security officers from various species. On her last day at Research Station Nexus, her colleagues gathered to say goodbye. Dr. Nylox presented her with a crystal sculpture that captured light in beautiful patterns. Dr. Buzzik gave her a collection of rare fungus samples for her personal research. Even Dr. Vex 7 contributed a comprehensive psychological profile of human capabilities that would be added to galactic databases. "We will miss you, So Young," Throck said as she prepared to board the transport shuttle. "You taught us that there is much more to humans than we realized. And you taught me that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers," she replied. As the shuttle carried her away from the station, So Young reflected on everything that had changed. She was still the same person who loved studying alien life forms and sharing homemade cookies with new friends. But now the galaxy understood that humans contained depths that few species had imagined. At the Galactic Peacekeeping Academy, So Young began teaching courses on threat assessment and tactical psychology. Her students were security officers from dozens of different species, all eager to learn from the human who had defeated the Corvathi raiders. "The most important lesson you must understand," she told her first class, "is that appearance and reality are often very different things. A species may seem weak or primitive, but possess capabilities that are not immediately obvious. A threat may appear harmless until circumstances reveal its true nature." She smiled at her students, the same gentle expression that had once caused her alien colleagues to underestimate her completely. Humans learned long ago that survival depends on knowing when to be kind and when to be dangerous. We prefer kindness whenever possible, but when those we care about are threatened, we become something that our enemies never expect to face. One of her students, a young Andromedan officer, raised his hand. "Professor Kim, how can we learn to recognize these hidden capabilities in other species?" "By listening," So Young replied. "By paying attention to what others tell you, even when it contradicts your assumptions. By understanding that every species has survival mechanisms that evolved over millions of years. And by remembering that the most dangerous predators are often the ones that do not look dangerous at all." The class ended with So Young assigning her students to research the evolutionary history of various galactic species, looking specifically for traits that might not be obvious in peaceful situations but could emerge under stress. As her students filed out of the classroom, So Young thought about her grandmother's words from long ago. "A gentle heart and a strong will can coexist in the same person. The key is knowing when each one is needed." The galaxy was learning this lesson about humanity, one student at a time, and So Young was proud to be the teacher who helped them understand that her species' greatest strength was not their technology or their physical abilities, but their capacity to be both the kindest friends and the most determined protectors that the galaxy had ever known. The story of the harmless human researcher who became a nightmare for space raiders spread throughout known space, becoming a legend that changed how humans were viewed forever. But for So Young, it was simply the day she had chosen to protect her friends, using every capability that millions of years of human evolution had given her. She remained, as she had always been, someone who preferred to offer cookies and friendship to new acquaintances. But now everyone understood that beneath that gentle exterior lay the heart of an apex predator that would never stop hunting those who threatened the innocent. The galaxy was a safer place because of this understanding, and So Young Kim, the gentle human scholar, continued her work of building bridges between species while teaching them all to respect the hidden depths that every intelligent being possessed. 6 months had passed since So Young began teaching at the Galactic Peacekeeping Academy. Her courses on threat assessment and tactical psychology had become the most popular classes in the entire institution. Students from dozens of species competed for spots in her seminars, eager to learn from the human who had single-handedly defeated the Corvathi raiders. The academy was located on Harmony Station, a massive facility that orbited the peaceful world of Centauri Prime. The station housed over 50,000 beings from across the galaxy, all dedicated to maintaining peace and security in civilized space. So Young had grown comfortable in her new role. Her small apartment overlooked the station's central garden, where plants from hundreds of worlds created a beautiful mixture of colors and scents. She enjoyed walking through the garden each morning before her classes, greeting the various beings she had come to know as friends and colleagues. But on this particular morning, Director Valen was waiting for her outside the garden entrance. The tall, blue-skinned Centaurian had a serious expression that immediately put So Young on alert. "Professor Kim," Director Valen said as she approached, "we need to speak privately. There has been a development that requires your expertise." They walked to Valen's office in silence. The director's workspace was decorated with awards and certificates from various galactic organizations, testament to his long career in peacekeeping. But today he seemed troubled by something that went beyond routine academy business. 3 days ago, Valen began once they were seated, we received a distress call from the Outer Rim trading post called Haven's Rest. The facility has gone silent, just like the stations that were attacked by Corvethi raiders. So Young felt a familiar chill run down her spine. "Have you sent an investigation team?" "We sent our best tactical unit," Valen replied grimly. "Commander Thex and 12 experienced peacekeepers. They arrived at Haven's Rest yesterday and found something unexpected." He activated a holographic display that showed the trading post floating in space. Haven's Rest was smaller than Research Station Nexus, designed to serve as a stopping point for merchants traveling between the core worlds and the frontier systems. "The station appears to be fully operational," Valen continued. "All systems are functioning normally. There are no signs of battle damage or forced entry, but the entire population of 800 beings has vanished without a trace." "What about security recordings?" So Young asked. "That is where the situation becomes truly disturbing," Valen said. "The security system shows normal activity up until exactly 48 hours ago. Then, in the span of 10 minutes, every single person on the station simply disappeared. They were there one moment, gone the next." So Young studied the holographic images of the empty trading post. The corridors and common areas looked normal, as if the inhabitants had simply stepped away for a few minutes and would return at any moment. "Commander Thex's team is conducting a detailed investigation," Valen continued, "but they have found no clues about what happened. No signs of struggle, no evidence of outside interference, no indication of where the missing people might have gone." "Why are you telling me about this?" So Young asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Director Valen leaned forward in his chair. "Because Commander Thex has requested your assistance. His team includes officers from 6 different species, all trained in advanced investigation techniques, but he believes that your unique perspective on threat assessment might reveal something they are missing." So, Young considered the request carefully. She had built a good life at the academy, teaching students and conducting research in a safe, controlled environment. The idea of returning to an active crisis situation brought back memories of her confrontation with the Corvethi raiders. "I am a teacher now," she said finally, "not a field operative. You are the only person in the galaxy who has successfully countered a threat that baffled everyone else," Valen replied. "Your analysis of the Corvethi situation saved hundreds of lives. Perhaps your insights could help us understand what happened at Haven's Rest." So Young looked out the window at the peaceful garden where students from dozens of species studied together in harmony. Part of her wanted to stay in this safe environment, where the greatest challenge was explaining tactical concepts to eager young minds. But another part of her, the part that had stalked through dark corridors hunting space pirates, felt a familiar stirring of curiosity and determination. "How long would I be away from my classes?" she asked. 2 weeks,